Hey there, and welcome. So, you've got a microeconomics exam on the horizon, huh? Well, you have come to the perfect place. Think of this as your personal study guide, where we're going to break down all the core ideas you need to know to absolutely crush those multiple choice questions. So let's get right into it, starting with the biggest question in all of economics.
You know, everything in this field, and I mean everything, boils down to this one simple question. Why can't we just have everything we want, whenever we want it? The answer to that is the fundamental problem that the entire study of economics is trying to solve.
And here's the answer. It's because we're dealing with a basic mismatch. See, on one side, our wants are pretty much unlimited. We always want more, or something better, or something different. But on the other side, the resources we have to get those things, our time, our money, the materials themselves, they're limited. They're scarce. So economics is basically the study of how we humans deal with that constant tension, the science of the choices that we are forced to make.
Okay, so that brings us to microeconomics. What microeconomics does is it takes this huge idea of choice and scarcity and puts it under a microscope. Actually, the word micro comes from the Greek word mikros, which means small. So instead of looking at a whole country's economy, we're zooming way in. We're focusing on the smallest economic players, you, your household, a single company. We're studying how these individual units make their decisions. Here's a super easy way to remember the difference, and trust me, this is a classic exam topic. It's the trees versus the forest analogy. Microeconomics is all about studying the individual trees. One person buying a coffee, one company deciding how many people to hire. Macroeconomics, on the other hand, steps way back to look at the entire forest. That's the national economy, unemployment rates, inflation, the big picture. For our purposes today, we are staying focused on the trees. So, if we're going to be studying the trees, what exactly are we looking for? What kind of questions does microeconomics actually try to answer? Let's break down its scope. This whole field can really be broken down into three main pillars, as you can see right here: commodity pricing, factor pricing, and the theory of economic welfare. So what on earth do those mean? Let's take a look.
Okay, first up, commodity pricing. This is all about figuring out the price of a single thing, like a gallon of milk. That price is set by demand and supply. Next, we have factor pricing. This is about the cost of the ingredients needed to make that milk, the farmer's land, the worker's wages. And finally, economic welfare asks a much bigger question. Are we using all our resources in the most efficient way possible to make everyone in society as well off as they can be?
All right, let's zoom in on factor pricing for a second, because this is a guaranteed topic for your exam. So there are four factors of production: land, labor, capital, and the entrepreneur who brings it all together. Each of these factors gets a specific type of payment. The payment for using land is rent. For labor, it's wages. For capital, that's stuff like machinery or business loans, the payment is interest. And for the entrepreneur who takes all the risk, the reward is profit. You'll definitely want to memorize these pairs. And here is a huge tip, a little heads up for your multiple choice questions. Because microeconomics is so obsessed with figuring out the prices of both goods and the factors used to make them, it has a couple of nicknames. It's often called price theory or value theory. So if you see those terms on your exam, don't get thrown off. They're just other ways of saying microeconomics. Okay, time for a quick sample question. Let's test this out. Which of these is not a primary concern of factor pricing? Is it A, rent, B, taxes, C, wages, or D, profit? Take a second. The answer is, of course, B, taxes. Why? Because rent, wages, and profit are the direct payments, the rewards, for those factors of production we just talked about. Taxes are something else entirely. All right, so now that we know what microeconomics studies, let's talk about how it studies it. What are the key tools and the main assumptions that economists have in their toolkit? The main technique used in microeconomics is something called the slicing method. And you know what? It's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. We take the entire economy and we slice it up into its tiniest individual components. One consumer, one business, one product, and then we study each of those little slices in super fine detail. This is literally how we study the individual trees instead of the whole forest.
Now, how can you possibly study one tiny slice without getting confused by the million other things that are always changing in the economy? Well, economists use a really important trick. It's a crucial assumption called ceteris paribus. It's a Latin phrase, and it just means other things being equal or all else being the same. This lets us isolate one variable. We can ask, hey, if we only change the price of coffee, what happens to how much people buy? And we do that by assuming everything else in the world, like your income or the price of tea, stays exactly the same.
You know, every single choice you make means you have to give something else up. In economics, this has a special name, opportunity cost. Let's look at a super simple example. You have a choice between waffles and chocolate. You can't have both. You pick the chocolate, so what's the opportunity cost? It's the waffles. It's the value of the next best thing that you had to give up. Every decision, big or small, has an opportunity cost.
And here it is, probably the most famous graph in all of economics, the supply and demand model. This shows us the relationship between price and quantity. You've got the demand curve, which slopes downwards. That shows that as prices go up, people tend to buy less. And then you have the supply curve sloping upwards. That shows that as prices go up, producers want to sell more. And right where those two lines cross, that's the magic spot. That's the market's equilibrium price and quantity.
So what's the logic behind those curves? Well, it comes down to two very simple laws. First, the law of demand. This is pretty intuitive, right? When the price of something goes up, people usually buy less of it. Then there's the law of supply. This is all about what motivates sellers. When the price for their product goes up, companies are way more excited to produce and sell more of it because they can make more profit. These two forces are constantly pushing against each other, and that's what creates the market price.
So, this dance between supply and demand happens in what we call a market. But here's the thing, not all markets are the same. In fact, they can look really different. Let's break down the main types you absolutely have to know for your exam.
Okay, this table right here is a goldmine for studying, so let's walk through it. Look at what happens as we move from left to right. We start with the number of firms. It goes from many firms and perfect and monopolistic competition, down to just a few in an oligopoly, and finally to just one firm in a monopoly. Now, watch how that one change affects everything else. When you have tons of firms all selling an identical product, like different people selling the same iPhone case on eBay, no single seller can control the price. They're called price takers. But what if the many firms sell differentiated products, like restaurants? Now they have some control over price because their food or their atmosphere is unique. Then you get down to just a few huge firms like car companies. Their control over price is significant. And finally, with a monopoly, one company has total control. Understanding these relationships is key for your exam.
So, we started this whole thing with the trees versus the forest analogy. To really lock that concept in your brain for the exam, let's just do one final direct comparison of the key technical differences between micro and macro.
This table adds a bit more detail. And here are two things you should definitely remember for your test. First, the economists. You want to associate micro with the classical guys like Adam Smith, and macro with more modern economists like John Maynard Keynes. And second, look at their goals. Microeconomics is all about the efficient use of resources to make individuals happy. Macroeconomics has a much bigger goal. It's trying to achieve full employment and economic growth for the whole country.
All right, one last pop quiz. Does the study of national income fall under microeconomics or macroeconomics? Well, since national income is a huge big picture number for the entire country, it has to be a topic for macroeconomics. It's about the whole forest, not one individual tree. Okay, let's do a super quick rapid-fire review. This is your final cheat sheet of the absolute must-know facts. Ready? Economics is about scarcity. Microeconomics uses the slicing method. Its other names are price theory or value theory. Its key assumption is ceteris paribus. Opportunity cost is the thing you give up. And finally, micro is the trees, macro is the forest. Got all that? Good. We've covered the absolute foundations of microeconomics. You now have the basic toolkit that every economist uses. So my final question for you is this. What real-world economic problem would you want to analyze first? Just thinking about that question, that's your first step to really thinking like an economist. Good luck on your exam.